So this is John Costa from the Documentary Media Centre, and we're nearly towards the end of the 16 days of activism. And one of the things I did earlier in the 16 days is actually put up about S Tilawa and keeping on touch with that project and how things are going with Emil and his father Cash as well. So I'm delighted that Emil is joining me today from Canada. So thank you for taking time out on a Saturday. I'm sure with your young son as well, you're very busy. And you were saying there about moving house, building houses, and also all of the feedback you must be getting from the event that you did recently down in Greenwich. So let's have a bit of a catch up. First of all, when will you get to catch your breath, do you think?
Yeah, well, firstly, John, sincerely, thank you so much for giving us the platform to continue to share our story and provide updates on Tilawa 1942 and the good work that is being done to push the subject to a more global audience. I believe that we may have spoken a year ago when we were. Was it before the
Yeah,
commemoration?
you were planning Mumbai. Yeah, Mumbai was going to be in a couple of weeks' time, and that's when we first caught up. Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, so yeah, since then, so much has happened. And yeah, like Tilawa 1942 is a voluntary side project. I mean, I have a very full life with, my wife is in medicine at the local hospital in Toronto. We have a 5-year-old, as you said, Luca, who's very active. I am in the financial services industry. I have a travel agency. We're building a home. We're going to be moving in a couple of weeks. 2023 has been a crazy year for sure.
Yeah, and somehow you squeezed a trip into London to celebrate the 81st at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, but we'll come on to that. So, I mean, it's, like you said, it's been quite the year. Now, I first heard about it, obviously, when I spoke to your dad. Your dad mentioned it to me at Sabras Radio. We bumped into each other. I was doing the Uganda 50 radio for the 50th commemoration here. And he mentioned it, and I was quite interested, obviously, having been a soldier and having a conflict memory project. And I was like, oh, why have I not heard of this? And of course, this is in fact encapsulates the whole project completely, which is this unknown footnote in history, if you like, that's impacted so many people in so many ways. But sometimes who's involved, where it was, the time in the war, and all that sort of stuff. Maybe the significance of it. All those kind of things that tend to make things memorable facts in timelines of World War II or major conflicts. We've got this incredible event. Absolutely tragic, but then survivors and impacts on families and finding out. So just recap for us briefly how you first found out about your connection to this particular event, your family connection.
So it was back in 2007. I'm 20 years old, in Toronto with my fiance, planning our wedding. Had one of my little Ericsson cell phones, and my father calls me and says that he was talking to my grandfather, who had somehow this random black and white photograph of this gentleman we've never seen before in the living room. And so, of course, my father asks, "Who is this person?" And my grandfather tells him that this is his real father. And so, the person who all these years we thought was my real great grandfather turns out to be my grandfather's uncle, the oldest brother of my grandfather's dad. And in 1942, when my great grandfather was going on the SS Tilawa with his first cousin, uh, he apparently couldn't swim. He dies. The first cousin survives, ends up moving to Leicester, has a very large family, and everybody in the community in Leicester knew that Devjibai Bagabai Solanki, the first cousin, had this adventure during the Second World War of surviving on a plank for 2 days and being bitten by sharks and all of this stuff. And yet, and their whole he died in the 80s. His whole family was very close to my grandfather, and my father and all of my aunts and uncles remember living near them and always having family dinners together and all of this stuff. Actually, when I was 18 years old, my father gave me a gold necklace. I call this the Kacholi, which is the name of our village,
Mm,
chain. A collection of chains all merged together. From one was given to me at my birth by my grandfather, one was given to me at my wedding by my grandfather, but one of the chains was actually from you know, my who I thought was my great grandfather, his uncle, which was given to my father when he was married.
mm,
So I've always thought of my great grandfather because I have this chain on me, but it turns out that he is my great granduncle, I guess.
mm,
If it wasn't for him adopting my grandfather and taking him to Africa and giving him a new identity and giving him a new life, for sure, my father and I would not have the life that we have, and history would be very different. But that's the connection to Tilawa, and you can imagine now at the age of 20, it's a bit of an internal crisis of identity because you're trying to figure out, well, what's my heritage, what's my roots, what's my lineage, which name am I carrying? And as you know, with Indians, we have, at least back then, very large families. And so my great grand uncle, he had several children, but my real great grandfather only had one. So now there was even more impetus as the my father was the oldest son. I am my father's firstborn. I'm the only boy he has. I have a son, Luca, and now we can preserve the line of Nichabai Chibabai Solanki, who was a real person. We now have a photograph. We finally found his name on the Transvaal Tilawa passenger list. And for me, that was the focus of number one, preserve his memory because no one ever made an effort to do so.
mm,
And number two, let's now learn more about this sinking of the ship story.
mm. So, like you said, you've got this revelation at the age of 20, and it's like we kind of now got a name and a face, I guess, as well to this person that we never knew existed. As you're investigating it over the years, as you're getting closer to the 2022 80th anniversary, at what point do you start realizing that this isn't just a story that's impacting your family, but other families as well? Are they aware of it? Or, about survivors? Are there people that were kind of, survived the event? And then also you get to that point where, hang on, it's if not me, who is going to advocate and lobby and become an activist, which is why I'm interested in this story, and advocate for these people to be one officially recognized, not just as a footnote, but actually as something that actually happened, to be there. And obviously being driven then into the 81st anniversary this year to be in sort of the National Maritime Museum as well, reading some of your content that's come out from there. They've kind of embraced you and want to know about it, obviously, because as a maritime museum, it ultimately impacted on the Allies and the British and all that kind of stuff in the war. At what point do you think, between then and now, did you think to yourself, actually, this is something I'm going to have to pick up and run with?
It's such an insightful question you ask, John, because the human mind um, works in two ways. There is just going to let this fire truck pass by. Um, okay, we should be good now. So
Brilliant.
um,
Just to show people it's live.
there is a part of our brain that dreams and fantasizes. And then there is a part of our brain that has a vision of where this could go. And I would say that when it comes to the story of Tilawa, my mind was tinkering with both aspects because, you know, uh, if the story is just about your personal connection to a family, you have to decide your threshold of closure.
Mm, mm,
And then you have to realize, is this something that you want to become a champion of? or is this something that should be buried and, just let people live their life and life moves on?
Mm.
I definitely saw the potential in this and I wanted to take it further. Now, we all need a little bit of a catalyst. We need a bit of a step up. And so there were three gentlemen in South Africa called who had set up this S Tilawa Foundation, and it was their attempt to try and find answers to many of their questions. Mr. Haroon Tal Muhammad was the gentleman who was consoling a friend at a funeral and ends up sharing stories of his dad. And this friend who had lost his dad says to Mr. Haroon, "Hey, my father in law was on the HMS Birmingham during the rescue mission of SS Tilawa." And that was like, oh my goodness, for Mr. Haroon, because through that interaction, that coincidence, he was able to get those two black and white photographs of people in the lifeboat and people on HMS Birmingham being rescued. Then he was able to get that Transvaal passenger list. But, they were humble enough to acknowledge that in South Africa, they didn't have much of a voice. They were getting on in years. They didn't have the energy, the youth, the circumstances, the bandwidth to drive it internationally. And so beyond the 65th anniversary and that 2007 newspaper article that my father found and gave to me, little was done. So to now answer your question, I felt, well, I know how to make a website. I know how to, through my other work, create social media accounts. I love branding and marketing and connecting with people. So that's what I did. I created the website I kind of started drawing out, and I still have the original document. What do I need to do? Who do I need to connect with? How can I do this in a very cohesive, systematical way? Let's get a logo that easily people can identify with. The dark blue sea, the silver, that's the other connection. The other catalyst, actually, another tangent, as my mind is kind of thinking here. When Ross Hyatt, the director of Argentum, had discovered the ship of SS Tilawa in 2017, it had triggered this unprecedented international lawsuit and between the Republic of South Africa and Argentum. And in 2020, when it hit the newspaper, when Sir Nigel Tier made his ruling that South Africa could not claim state immunity, it had become, I think it was in the Sunday Times. My father presents this article to me. Remember, by this point now, I'm in Canada. I moved to Toronto. I got married in 2008. I moved here in 2009. And that newspaper article was like, okay, we can take this a little bit further, because my grandfather's wish was find a ship and find the body. It was an impossible task for someone like me. I got a quote that it would cost about 10,000 US dollars just to spend time in the middle of the Indian Ocean with no aid, trying to find a ship 3,500 meters deep. It was just couldn't afford it. And Ross Hyatt's team, it took them 6 months to actually find the ship. So it's a very expensive endeavor. But it was that discovery that then encouraged me to make the website, set up the Tilawa 1942 support group, get social media accounts, hope that radio interviews and newspaper articles will send the word out. And so now going back to your original question, it was all of those efforts together that just started one after the other. Families connecting with us through the website, through social media. And before you know it, we now have a Tilawa 1942 family, and it keeps growing.
I mean, this is one of the I guess, kind of focus on, isn't it, with a project like this, is when you suddenly discover that you have one second.
Yeah, your video's gone off.
Yeah, there we go. That should come back on then. Yeah. When you suddenly discover this connection to an event that's, you know, of such a significance that is really kind of missing from a lot of the history books, you kind of you take on this responsibility, don't you? Particularly when you start getting correspondence from people that you don't know from around the world and go, oh, I hear you're doing this. Suddenly you become the custodian of other people's memories as well. And this is one of the things that really fascinates me about this project as a journalist, and also a documentarian, I guess, is that I often say documentary media is like film, photography, audio, and new media. So the new media part you do very well. I mean, it's a fantastic website. I mean, it's an absolutely excellent logo, as you mentioned there about the silver and the blue. Audio, you know, you've got a lot of audio content now, and interviews, photography, obviously family photos, people giving you, you know, pictures of survivors, you know, those that are lucky enough to have photos of those that were deceased on the thing. And I guess that really leaves me to think about, you know, the kind of the film element, the telling of the story now, because you know where the ship is, you know, you got a pretty good idea about, you know, where it was, you know, HMS Birmingham's picked it up. I guess that should have been a, you know, a great incentive for the National Maritime Museum to be interested, because there was a military, you know, British allied connection to this civilian cargo ship. I like your website, you know, why was it there? You know, was it a threat? Why did the Japanese sink it? And of course, all of these kind of conspiracy theories about what was it carrying, what was it doing there, all these kind of stories, they all kind of perpetuate themselves. It's a really quite an interesting documentary, I guess, as to, you know, telling that story. Have you approached anybody? Has anybody approached you to have that kind of conversation? Because I think ultimately it's a story that one has an immense opportunity to be told, but I think will be of interest to a lot of people because it really resonates.
Yeah, I always felt that in order for the forgotten tragedy to no longer be forgotten, documentary is a wonderful way of helping the audience connect stories of the Commonwealth in this case, and the immigration journey of the diaspora of the Indian people, and in essence how one initiative could lead to the benefit of comfort and closure for thousands of people around the world. Look, we are already in the first draft of a film script. And when you're trying to get the story out there beyond social media and news articles and radio interviews, you've got to start thinking about how do you want a product to be on the history shelf long term, and you want it to be an educational resource long term. At first, you know, the average person thinks of a documentary and a film as, oh, you know, it's a commercial money making endeavor. It's not. It's very expensive. There's no profit in there for me. You've got to raise the money, and you know, distributors and producers have their own agenda. So I don't know what's going to come from these efforts of sowing seed, but I can tell you that I have engaged two award-winning producers. One is a scriptwriter, one is a British documentary film director, and they actually went on my behalf to MIPCOM in Cannes a couple of months ago, October 2023, and they have actually attached a celebrity UK artist to the documentary. There are different views around the documentary. Should it just be about Tilawa, or should Tilawa be one episode of a documentary series? Should the documentary series be about salvage? Should it be about maritime tragedies? Should it be about the Indian people? So, you know, there's different things going on here. I felt that the missing piece to all of this was research, photos, and videos that Argentum and Mr. Hyatt have access to. In addition to that, I have been quite eager in pursuing um, both parties because both parties have the potential to make a donation to the work.
Mm.
Uh, National Maritime Museum a couple of years ago were more apathetic to our efforts because they felt that somehow it was a war story when in many cases it's not.
Mm.
And as I've got to know the curator and the team at the museum, it's very clear that they do have war stories there, even though that's not our focus. They have a lot on India up until the mid 1800s, and then they have a little bit on Gandhi and this stretch on the East India Company. But actually, I feel that Tilawa would be a fantastic, more meaty, meaningful contribution. And so one of the things that the curator was looking for, and this connects to your question and to my context, is objects. So
Mm.
those objects could be physical objects, they could be photographs. They found recently two photographs that I had never seen of the ship, probably when it was newer in the 20s, because Tilawa was built in 1924 and it was in use for about 18 years. Um, but you know, we have our own photographs. We've got the Transvaal passenger list. We've got those two photos from. So we've got photographs of the ship. We've got the photographs of the survivors, and now, if we are able to get permission to at least get a picture of the silver bars, or take a photo of the silver bars, or at least get one of those silver bars donated to the museum, or if people have the opportunity to buy some of those silver bars, that would be a very precious historical object. You talk about families reaching out to us. We have a family in Canada that, and that's a new development too, is Canada wasn't interested in the story before, but I've worked very hard in trying to make a Canadian connection, and I can talk about that in a moment. But one of the families, um, they have the blanket that the crew of HMS Birmingham had
Wow.
given to Mr. Puran Singh. Um, and so if they're able to cut a piece or to donate that piece to the National Maritime Museum, if we're able to get a model of this ship made, then we could very quickly end up with a display and exhibit at the National Maritime Museum, including video interviews and things like that. So that's kind of a summary of the film, the documentary, objects that could potentially be put in the museum.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic, even those additional bits there that I said I was unaware of that you've mentioned about the blanket and stuff, because for any museum, an authentic object that has a connection. And again, for the National Maritime Museum here in the UK to have something that was from a British warship, HMS Birmingham, that just adds that extra angle. Now, something I want to talk to you about as well is about, and I guess it relates to the survivors, and what surviving a tragedy like that actually not only does to the survivor, obviously from their life and how their life changes, and as I've obviously said, from your family's perspective, being taken in by the uncle, and able to then rebuild a life, if you like, is the fact. I remember we were standing on Abbey Park, yeah, and it was in July, August time last year, 2022, and there was these two guys with their Wakeley school. We built a special school here for 2 years, and all the Ugandan Asian teenagers went to this school, special school, and standing there, and they were looking for a couple of, classmates, hopefully, and we'd interviewed them on the radio, and then one came over, and then one had heard me talking 2 hours before the Abbey Park event on radio and shot up. His wife said he sat bolt upright and said, "Right, we're going to Abbey Park. I need to go and speak to my old school friends," And it was amazing. And then literally we've got this picture and there's about 7 or 8 people all there deep in conversation, chatting away. And I just said to him, "Can I, just interrupt for a second? How many of you have got children?" And it was like, 5, 6, you know what I mean? 7, 2, that kind of stuff. What do they do? Banking, Barclays, Google, Foreign Office. And what you don't think about necessarily, and this kind of really thinks with this story as well, you was talking about yourself and your dad, is, when someone survives like that, there's almost like a reason to live, and sort of, do even better for your kids than you would have done before. And then what they go on and do as they go forward, when you think about it, how many people survived that tragedy, and what they do now, and, their families. And it's that role of constantly keeping that memory alive, not only of those that have, that were killed, tragically killed, or passed away since, without necessarily knowing that it had been acknowledged, but, acknowledging the role of the survivors in being able to contribute to society, if you like. I always think that big thing, we take that for granted, our roles. We talk about human rights, but what about human responsibilities, which is to help other people. And I think what you're doing really with this project is an amazing thing, because it allows those people's stories to matter and to be relevant. And this kind of brings me back to the 80th thing last year in Mumbai, your anniversary there. What kind of reception did you get initially? Because you said, the National Maritime Museum initially was a little bit sort of, hesitant or whatever. Now kind of on board. Was it the same there? And then once you've done the 80th and you mark the 81st, is it almost like they see that you're serious, and once you've got the information you want, you're not going to disappear, you're going to keep going and kind of building a lasting memorial?
Yeah, I anticipated this question. It's a good juncture too, because now we can talk about the developments over the past 12 months. And yes, when we had gone to the National Maritime Museum a couple of years ago, they have a section or a team that's dedicated to oral stories. And we had located Mr. Arvind Jani from Thornton Heath, South London. His house is probably less than a 10-minute drive from the very home that I was raised in and lived in for 22 years. Mr. Mervyn Maciel, who's now aged 95. Mr. Jani was 3 years old as a baby when his mother rescued him. And then Mr. Maciel was 13 years old in Bombay in school when he lost his parents and his siblings to the tragedy. And we just felt that there were, in addition to these two families, there were other families that we had connected with that could all together share these stories. But the National Maritime Museum was hesitant. And so, I thought, where is the next best place to have a commemoration? Because I always wanted to have 3 commemorations, one in Britain, because a lot of the Indian families have settled in Britain that have a connection to Tilawa. And we kind of could conclude that based on the response that we had through newspaper articles and radio interviews and our social media presence and the work of the website. So that was a good thing. But we also knew that Tilawa had last left the Ballard Pier in Mumbai, and it was on its way to Durban, South Africa. So depending on progress and depending on how global this could become, those 2 locations were at the back of my mind. But in order to initiate something, since it was tough to get something done in Britain, and I always felt that Britain was the place to get something done because we had more connections in Britain than we did in India. Well, I had reached out maybe a couple of years ago to the Maritime Mumbai Museum Society. And at that time, we didn't get the desired response either. But then about a year later, they were doing a lecture on SS Dwarka. And my father was actually attending that online lecture. And he had connected with the team there, who then introduced us to the founder of the Mumbai Museum, who was a retired admiral of the Indian Navy. And the president of the museum now, who was a captain previously, in the Indian Navy, and the vice president who is now helping with the more operational side of setting up strong maritime heritage preservation in Mumbai. So they welcomed us, and they said that they will assist us in setting up a press conference, in securing the location. The Grand Hotel was perfect in this very colonial vibe of South Mumbai, right by the Ballard Pier, right next to McKinnon Mackenzie, where the agents would secure those tickets for various voyages. And the Grand Hotel may have been used by affluent passengers or by the crew of SS Tilawa, HMS Birmingham, SS Cornwall, HMS Carthage, etc. So it just developed, and the Jani family were willing to come. The Patel family were willing to come. The British Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Alan Gemmell, was our chief guest. Well-known Bollywood star Mr. Johnny Lever was going to be a special guest. And before you know it, we had 120 people that were willing to attend the first ever commemoration in the world to acknowledge the incident, to officially memorialize the loss of 280 lives. And how fitting to actually do it in the very place where Tilawa last left, and where the survivors came back. And from that point, we then, with the discovery of the ship back in 2017, with the bars at the receiver of wreck, with this first commemoration, with families coming forward, it would then become a new catalyst for the next year of development.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned in there as well about three events. So you've had Mumbai and you've had the UK. Is the third one you're aiming for in South Africa? And will that be 2024? Or are you kind of focusing on Canada, as you said earlier, building that Canadian connection?
Durban 2024 commemoration, November 3rd, is a go. It's going to happen. And we could easily have 200 people at that location. And, people have been able to see how I put a program together, the choreography behind the program. If you think, for example, with Mumbai, we had the Maritime Museum give the intro. I gave the keynote address. My father was the chairman of the program. We had video interviews and in-person interviews. We had a video that I had produced on summarizing the story and developments in publicity. We had the moment of silence, memento presentations, etc., refreshments before and afterwards, and really making it special, where families can take their photographs with a nice display. They can be given a pin of the occasion. And, the article was in, I actually wrote a piece for East and I during that time. And then I wrote another piece for the Times of India, which was really nice for them to allow me to do that. And as a result of those efforts, and the news piece, London ITV News, and then Leicester ITV, Sabras Radio, Leica Radio, BBC Radio Leicester, BBC Asia Network did a piece, BBC World Service did a piece, and I mean, it's just grown. We had a survivor who was 98 years old, who was living in Ontario, who had gone back to India during the time of the 80th commemoration, who we didn't know back then. And we connected with him thereafter. We were able to secure a Zoom interview, and then he died, I think, a couple of weeks after that interview. So it was really nice to connect with him. The other survivor that had come forward from Cincinnati, Ohio, whose siblings are all in Canada, and she, of course, connected with us, I think, a week or two before the Mumbai commemoration, so she couldn't travel there. But, all of this was still laying the groundwork for 2023, because at the end of 2022, Rishi Sunak's office sent that letter of acknowledgement and support. And by that point, we could then go back to the National Maritime Museum and say, this is what we would like to do. Two known survivors are willing to attend. Um, and and that's what ended up happening. You know, the Court of Appeal with the silver bars took place in March. South Africa lost again. They then appealed to the UK Supreme Court, which that 2 day hearing would take place a couple of days after the Greenwich commemoration. And we'll see what happens with the results of that Supreme Court case. But it's just been great. I guess now I can tell you more about the Greenwich commemoration.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, it's the good thing about having the thing recorded as well is that there's an opportunity for people to go and listen to the whole thing or pick out the bits that they want, the survivor stories and stuff. The sort of the summaries and the various keynote speakers that there were. I mean, from your perspective, has it captured everything that you want it to capture? Because really, these kind of projects, they never finish. I'm not sure I should tell you that, but these things never end. You know what I mean? This will be Luca's inheritance from you. Will be picking up this and keeping the updating the payments on the domain name. Is the fact that people will still keep coming forward and wanting to research it and write books, and then it will become chapters in things, and as we revisit certain, 2042 isn't that far away now, really. So the 100-year commemoration of 1942 as a year during the sort of global conflagration will be of interest to many more researchers than we thought of. And then particularly as now it's almost straightforward, everybody seems quite comfortable, and it's no longer controversial to talk about the contribution of communities, nations and peoples from the Commonwealth countries as they were, or the empire as they were then, to the war effort, and how important that was. And we still seem to, we mustn't take our eye off the ball in making sure that's always placed central to that. You just seem to be coming into a period now over the next 10 years where I think this story will definitely rise up there as one that is very important in the remembrance of the role of India in particular, Africa as well, in that sort of global effort against the Nazis and the various forces of evil and stuff that we were against then. From your perspective, the next 10 years,
Yeah,
what would you like to come out of it? You've spoken about the documentary. Are you kind of talking to people about books and things like that?
look, when you think of the forgotten tragedy, it's still forgotten tragedy because after 17 years, we're just getting warmed up. And to your first sentiment that it's never ending, I I think that's what also makes me very happy
Mm.
because you're just laying one piece, you're unlayering one piece of the onion at a time. And I see the potential of this. And somebody only needs to, I'll give you an example. Somebody only needs to mention a name or a connection, and that's a new opening for me. So,
Mm.
for example, my father at the time of this interview with you is in India. Well, we always thought that my great grandfather and his first cousin were the only people from Kocholi, India on SS Tilawa. It turns out that there were many other families in Nosari, the main surrounding town, and another family, the Kapadias in Kocholi, that some perished and some survived. You know, we've you're going to appreciate this connection, John. The This year has also developed the African connection because we had other families from South Africa and Zimbabwe and Kenya touch base with us. There was, for example, a gentleman who was the founder of a gurudwar in Mombasa, and his daughter is still alive in Delhi or Punjab actually, but her son is in Delhi, and they had got in contact with us uh, with the story of her father who died. In turn, their relatives in Canada, when they were in Uganda in school, had a teacher who was a survivor of SS Tilawa. In addition to that, the very well-known family, the Madhavanis, who I believe had a very large business in Uganda. One of I think she's the daughter or the granddaughter of the Madhvanis, Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, Namisha Madhvani, who is the High Commissioner from Uganda to the UK. She's located in London, of course. John, her mother, her three aunts, and her grandmother were all survivors of the SS Tilawa and were assisted by the captain to get into the lifeboat. And then, when they arrived back in Mumbai, which family supported them and were looking out for these very young teenage girls? The Mehta family, the Mehta group, the Mehta family are one of the most famous families in all of India. In fact, the grandson is married to a Bollywood actress, and it's just, it's not that we're pursuing fame, but it's even these families were affected or connected to the forgotten tragedy, and they can help us bring more of a voice to the work of Tilawa 1942. We do, my father and I have been using personal funds with the work that we're doing, and we need to your question, we need to generate funds to do to push things further, whether it's organizing commemorations, travel expenses, writing a book, writing a script, producing a documentary, making a model of a ship, buying a silver bar, obtaining objects, uh, you know, making a donation to a museum so that we can get some real estate space there. All of this costs money. But in addition to that, if they have a position of influence of any kind to try and get an acknowledgement from Japan, or to get support from the royal family or from the cabinet office, etc. Like, all of this can only positively help the bigger picture of drawing families. And you're right. And I recall this from the interview that we had a year ago in 2022, that the 100-year anniversary of the SS Tilawa, I would like to think that by then the forgotten tragedy is more of a nickname and more motivating mission of the work, rather than it being a reality uh, by the 100-year anniversary. And I don't know who's going to be alive at that point. I mean, we're already at the point where the survivors have mostly gone. But at that point, of the 100-year anniversary, if the children, the grandchildren, the great grandchildren can help contribute around the Commonwealth to keep that flame alive and to always appreciate that this was a tragic Indian story. And we believe that it's the only passenger ship that was actually attacked in the middle of the Indian Ocean during the Second World War. And that if it wasn't for the survival, that all of us would not be here today living the lives that we live. You mentioned earlier when you would bump into people at Abbey Park and asking what their children and grandchildren are doing. A lot of these children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, they take for a lot for granted. They don't really know their heritage and their roots, and they don't appreciate that their very existence on this planet is directly impacted by what happened, at this point 81 years ago.
Absolutely, everybody's story is important as as a small piece of the jigsaw, and of course with a project like this, the more pieces you find of the jigsaw, you realize that the jigsaw just keeps getting bigger. It doesn't actually ever get to the point where there's edges. But so my
And,
final question, yeah,
and
yeah.
you need the help of other people too. Like, I had written to Buckingham Palace and I didn't get a response. But when Mr. Mervyn Maciel, the 95-year-old from South London, when he wrote a letter, Um, King Charles is, yeah, I should say, His Majesty King Charles III, you know, private secretary's team or what have you, sent a letter to Mervyn, and it was really nicely worded.
Mm, mm,
I believe just that, having read that letter, which I think was sent in October of this year, it reminded me then of Prince Philip's connection, trust, or work in maritime heritage history. And I'm wondering if that's something that we can tap into. So again, originally when you're talking about, that the work is ongoing, even when you think about this anniversary commemoration at Greenwich and the rich program, comparing that program to the one last year,
mm,
the Right Honourable Keith Vaz, his speech was very, very encouraging. The Mayor of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, his comments, the curator of the museum, the insightful presentation that he gave, having artists like Navin Kundra at the commemoration, uh, and now having Namisha Madwani willing to participate, support, and even attend in Durban next year, we are poised for, I think, another productive year. I can tell you now that Argentum have been approached by filmmakers and other companies for any information. I'm a little bit nervous about that because, in full transparency, we want to make sure that Tilawa families have access to all of that. And we don't want a company buying it, hoarding it, and then not sharing.
mm.
So we'll see what 2024 brings, but that's just a summary of the type of activity that's been taking place in 2023.
Brilliant. Well, I had one final question, Emil, and that was just really about a memorial. Is there, what are your plans for? I don't necessarily physically mean a built structure, but sort of, like an ongoing list of names that's held officially that gets added to as you find people, maybe manifests and stuff like that. I mean, is there a thought about a role of honor or a memorial in some ways, or is there an interest in Mumbai owning it down by the dock where it left from? I mean, that would be a kind of a natural one, I guess, rather than London. But then again, this ship obviously sailed between Mumbai and Durban as well. So what's Durban's ownership of that kind of thing?
It's a very good question. Firstly, the there isn't an official passenger list, and the Transvaal Congress passenger list is incomplete.
Hmm.
So even that idea of an incomplete list and at least my great grandfather's name being on it was an absolute miracle. On our website, we have attempted to have an online memorial by trying to collect. See, in London, the Tower Hill Memorial actually actually mentions Tilawa, and there are maybe three or four names of uh, crew members that were listed under Tilawa at Tower Hill Memorial. Similar can be said in Hong Kong, as well as the book of memorial in Mumbai. I can't remember. I think it's called the Seamen's Club. And at the Seamen's Club nearby, they actually have the official World War One and World War Two memorial there. And in that book, there are names of crew members from SS Tilawa. When it comes to doing something official in a museum or in a physical place like the Ballard Estate, it's very difficult because the first thing is, well, if you can't do it because it's owned by someone who doesn't want to do that, or if the government does it, then they've got to do it for everybody.
Yeah.
So in some areas, just getting a plaque to acknowledge the incident would be a big win. And then in other areas, like for example, in the museum, if we were able to get an exhibit, and if the Transvaal passenger list was part of that exhibit, then that would kind of contribute
Mm,
to the answer of your question. The website is a memorial in itself, and I have a lot of work to do with updating it with a lot more pictures, a lot more stories, and going on to what I've done is you'll see on our website that there is that the passenger list
mm.
has been broken up between survivor and missing.
Yeah, I've got that in front of me now, actually. Yeah.
So as stories come in, we're going to start bolding the names that have
Okay.
come forward so that people can more easily see, ah, okay, there's a connection there.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay, that's brilliant. I mean, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. Like I said, it's also nice to interview someone who has crystal clear clarity when it comes to remembering people's names, which is amazing. That's definitely a skill that you've got there when you interview other people. They're like, there was a guy called yeah, and then he introduced me to someone who was that. So from that point of view, this is I like to think that this recording is actually adding to that accuracy of the record keeping as well. When it comes to just being able to help you in your progress, you know, in this amazing undertaking. It's incredibly impressive. And I'm certainly, you know, feel privileged to be involved in it and to be able to help in some small way. And wish you luck in the next 12 months as we move into Durban. It'd be nice to maybe do another catch up, maybe sort of early new year or towards springtime when you've made some progress with Durban 3rd of November 2024, and maybe we can get your dad involved as well and take it from there. Thanks very much, Amit.
Yeah, thank you again. This has been fun, and it's a nice way to wrap up the year, and let's see what 2024 brings.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Cheers.